Okay, can I start with you, Caroline?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're okay. Do you encounter much resistance, either among doctors or patients, when you challenge that tenet of patient-centered care?
Yes, I think the sort of knee-jerk response is, of course it's got to be patient-centered care. The doctors aren't there for themselves, or they shouldn't be there for themselves. They should be there for the patient. So how can you begin to challenge patient-centered care? But I think when I tease it out in this way, then actually doctors very often become quite interested in what I'm saying.
And patients, do they get upset or feel disenfranchised? Or?
I haven't. When my book was published last year, so I kind of talked at the Edinburgh Festival and Hay and whatever. So that was lay audiences, and no, I don't think it has been challenged quite so much. And I think patients probably accept that. Their experience is that they want the relationship.
Yeah, very good. Okay. Brian, you described and you've written about how you were accused of unkindness, was the word you used, by the family of the woman you treated in the emergency department. And I'm just curious, I presume like the rest of us, you have been challenged when you've made a mistake or so. How did the feeling of being accused of unkindness, how did that feel compared to being told that in another situation that you'd actually made a mistake? How did that play out?
So, Muiris, it depends on who's making the accusation when it comes to competence or a mistake. Competence, of course, being a more pervasive issue. But let's just say it's a patient who accused me of making a mistake. I think if a patient or family member, maybe there's a doctor in the family who has said should have done this, should have ordered that, should have gotten the CT of the chest looking for the pulmonary embolus. That there are nuances that they may not be aware of. There are shades of gray. It may be that situationally it in fact was the right decision at the time, or there may be different opinions. Okay, fair enough. So you can assuage yourself in that way. But when somebody accuses you of unkindness, well, I think everybody kind of knows what that means. And so it hit me to the core. It was such an unusual criticism. That it made me sit up and take notice. But I have to say that if a colleague accused me of making an error, it might evoke the same kind of shame response that I felt at that moment when I was busted by that family.
Do you mind describing to us how did you deal with the unkindness? How did that play out afterwards for you?
I had a meeting. It was a very interesting thing. The first thing that I noticed was that the letter that was written to me personally. It was not written to the General Medical Council, the College of Physicians and Surgeons in Canada. So that was a lifeline. And even though I was very defensive at that time in my life, very sensitive to criticism, tending to argue against it because I was dealing with this shame-proneness, that I still found it difficult. But even there, I saw a glimmer of hope. And in time, I realized that they were offering me a lifeline. They thought that there might be a kind person beating, the heart of a kind person beating underneath all of that brusqueness. And so, my chief offered to go with me to this meeting with the family, and I thought, no, they don't want to see a Politburo. They want to see me. And I sat there, and it was a large gathering. There were about 8 or 9 people at the meeting, 8 or 9 adults, and each of them spoke in turn. And they cried, and I cried, and in the end, we became friends. How many of us in healthcare believe that being criticized is the beginning of the end? That's the end. What's next? The door. You know, if I can leave you with one thought, it's the beginning of the beginning. It's the beginning of wisdom. That's the moment when people love you, they criticize you, and if you accept it and you get better as a result of it, it's actually, you know, it's from those arguments better things happen. And that was, you know, for me, I had a doorway. I could either head towards a path of depression and who knows what else, or I could start to like myself a little bit more and realize I'm still okay even when I make mistakes or I'm unkind.
Okay, thank you. Caroline, you speak about stress doctors being the result of contemporary medical practice and how that erodes the key relationships in doctors' professional lives. How can we change that? Can we?
That's a small question.
Sorry.
How can we change it? I think that it is beginning to change, and that's why I draw really great comfort from things like this report, which hasn't yet been published, that the GMC commissioned. I mean, in my book, I'm very critical of the GMC on a number of different accounts, but I think they have commissioned this, and he is we can't change it unless there is both a top-down and a bottoms-up commitment to doing so. And also, crucially, if we think about some of the things that he's talking about, you know, this is going to be costly. We can't change it unless there is the funding enabling one to do that. So that would be the stumbling block. But I think that the culture is beginning to change, and the idea that kindness, not being burnout, kindness is a sort of optional extra, and that quality healthcare can just go on pushing the staff forever, and it will still remain. I think there's enough good quality research coming out which is showing that this is a systemic, institutional, cultural issue, that things will begin to change.
This is for both of you. There are so many system issues out there. I mean, you could reel off 10 or 12 of them without even thinking. And really, they're the things that I think interfere with us giving our best to the job. So is there anything we can do, either individually or collectively, to change things? It's like an honours 5, isn't it? Sorry. Do you want to come in, Brian?
I think talking about our least pleasant aspects of ourselves. I certainly believe, as Dr. Brené Brown has suggested in her many books, that being vulnerable, risking vulnerability by talking about your mistakes or by talking about your foibles, that this is not the end, it's the beginning. It's the beginning of connection, and that we should be striving for connection in everything that we do. You know, we won't connect with everybody at all times. I'm not, you know, that motherhood and apple pie slide will stick with me. But I think risking vulnerability is one thing that I've certainly learned. One of the things I've learned when I'm vulnerable with patients is that they are almost infinitely forgiving. And I didn't know that would be the case. I thought they would say, leave now. They don't. They don't do that. They're forgiving, and I think we can be more forgiving with one another, and I think we're not forgiving with one another in healthcare.
Tate Shanafelt has done some quite, I think, groundbreaking research on the kind of different systemic drivers of burnout. And I think one of the interesting things he talks about in that, and it's a very good beginning, is to get the data. Don't assume, yes, I know in the UK we've got an NHS staff wellbeing, there's a annual staff survey, but which I think is often quite problematic. But I suppose one of the things that people can do in their individual context, if it's a GP or a hospital or the department, is through talking to people and also maybe getting some, and it would have to be anonymized and well-anonymized data, just begin by finding out the extent of the problem. And that's what you would do clinically in terms of research. And that can be a good starting point in terms of trying to change what's happening in terms of well-being.
Yeah. Personally, I have a thing that we need more time.
Yeah.
Okay. And you talked about the bottom, from the top down. Are we ever going to be able to persuade politicians and the ruling government of the day to actually put that value, so in other words, to make the minimum consultation general practice 20 minutes and whatever the comfortable equivalent is in outpatient departments? I mean, I want them to.
Yeah.
But,
Well, one answer which comes to mind, when I was writing the book, because it was also published in the US, I did some research in the States, and for various reasons, I was talked to some people in Camden, New Jersey, who had started a new medical school, and it's a very, very deprived population, and it was wanting to have different sorts of medical students who themselves matched came from locally from different populations. Why had that new medical school been funded? It had been funded because the governor had had a heart attack in Camden. The New Jersey governor had had a heart attack in Camden, New Jersey, and his life had been saved by the hospital that wanted to start a medical school but couldn't get the funding. What I think one of the things that one can do is to try to get politicians and people with power to think about the quality of their healthcare that they receive, or the healthcare of their loved ones, and that you may just get something quirky like that, but on a national scale, where somebody's own experience resonates so clearly with what people are saying about more time, that they get it.
I'm sure you're right. It reminds me of when patient organizations, advocacy groups, they find someone, a famous actor, usually or actress, with a condition, and suddenly they put them out there front, and the money flows and everything happens. So it's a bit like that.
So I think I would get the politicians to think about, just to think about their own health experience and of their family.
Okay. We'll try and do a bit of that. Okay, we're a little tight for time, and I want you guys to have plenty of opportunity to ask questions. So forgive me, I'm a little bit challenged with the light in terms of seeing hands go up.
There's one there.
Just one here in the front. Yeah, there's a roving mic coming. Yeah.
Hi, Gerard Crotty, I'm a haematologist. I think both speakers alluded to courage or bravery at some stage, and I just wonder, could you expand a little on this? I mean, I think there is, particularly when you're less experienced, if you haven't done it many times, going and having that empathetic or that breaking bad news conversation or whatever it is, does require a bit of steeling yourself and preparing, and it's like any procedure. It's difficult the first time you do it, but after 100 times you do get better at it, and it gives you a good feeling when you do it well, and it benefits both the doctor and the patient. I wonder if you have any further comments on that courage that's required to go and do those difficult conversations.
Thank you.
A couple of things that I'd like to say to address that. First of all, in Caroline's book, Also Human, you described in one chapter the least experienced member of the team being thrown into talking to the parents of a baby who had died at home, and how appalling that was. And in my second book, In the Secret Language of Doctors, I talked about that. That we often throw the least experienced person in to have that conversation, which is appalling. So I think the first thing is acquiring that courage. I think, first of all, recognizing that we all have courage. Courage is the definition of courage is doing something that you're afraid to do, and you still do it. So having someone mentor you. So the first time you are party to a conversation like that, you witness it, you don't conduct it, and then, as you're guided, I sit in with that resident who is breaking that bad news. But we talk about, what's the game plan when we go in. I was taught by the late Dr. Robert Buckman, who was my mentor, and as he had said, and I of course, in accident and emergency, I've had this conversation far too many times. Speak clearly, and then from that point on, empathize with what the person, acknowledge with what the person is saying. It doesn't matter how you do it. You sit there, you look as if you have all the time in the world, and in fact, you arrange your affairs so that you have as much time as you need. It's not easy. On my best days, I think I can continue doing it, and on my most challenging days, I wonder if I have only one or two such conversations left in me.
Fair enough.
I would agree. I think it is about, as Brian said earlier on, I think it's about senior doctors being vulnerable with their medical students and with their juniors to have a discussion about the times that they've done it badly, the times that they've done it well, and then the accompanying and so that a medical student or a junior doctor can see how it's done, and then to have if you were doing that, Brian, with more junior doctors or medical students, having a time for a little debriefing afterwards. That's how we can, and the senior just acknowledging how difficult it is. I can tell you, I remember when I used to do the observation of consultants, I saw how it shouldn't be done once. I saw it this was on a ward round where the consultant, the lab results had come back, and I think it was a kidney cancer or pancreatic. I can't remember. It was about 18 years ago. And at that point, the consultant disappeared from the ward round, and he left it and the ward round disappeared. He said, I think the nurse is going to give you is going to talk to you about your test results now. And the ward round moved on, and the patient was left with the nurse. But the medical students and the residents, that's what they saw. They saw it being, and so it's about the relationships that you'll have with your seniors and how those are used most effectively to teach the juniors.
Thank you. I don't see a sea of hands, so actually I'm going to go with the clock here, if that's okay. Thank you both very much. It's been a hugely stimulating session. You've got us, I think, into a really good space in terms of thinking about things, and some things that perhaps are difficult to think about, but we nonetheless we do need to address them. So thank you both very much for putting together that session. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.